to INDIAai Conversations. Today I have a very special guest with me. It's Professor Shamika Ravi. She is an economist, non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Institute, director of research at Brookings India, former member of PM's Economic Advisory Council, and former economic professor at Indian School of Business. Very welcome to INDIAai Conversations, Professor Shamika Ravi. And many people were very excited when I told them I'm going to have a conversation with you, because they all were telling, do pass on this to her, that we use the data sheet to eat for every day, to prepare ourselves and in the debates they participate in and to align with their view. And it has been very helpful, the analysis you provide based on data on the COVID crisis. And everyone was telling, they are all very grateful for the work you have been doing in that sense. Thank you, Professor.
My job, Jibu.
Yes, of course.
This is the least we can do
Yes.
at a time like this.
Yes.
No, but my pleasure. Absolutely an honor. Thank you to have me.
So I want to start about some of the work you did in 2018. You have written a lot about AI in India and comparing it to the global development in AI. And there was a paper you co-authored in 2018, which pointed out this huge gap between research and development in AI compared to something like China and US. I mean, it's not a realistic comparison to make, but still the gap is so big. And we as a country faces our own challenges, as we have experienced, right, in a different scenario. But how can we address this gap in R&D, not just in AI in generally? Because we have, from time to time, we have seen Indians are always smart. We are never short of brilliant minds. But there is this gap. How can we address that?
So you're right. At the end of the day, I think the problem in the AI space, and I think the solutions will also fundamentally depend on R&D at large. And the problems, or let's say the constraints we are facing in terms of moving towards a knowledge economy. And this percolates down into every aspect of our economy. The less you invest in knowledge, creation, knowledge building, knowledge dissemination too, I think, it limits future growth. If you don't have enough faculty, you don't have enough educators. So it's a vicious cycle, really. The next generation is also therefore less adequately prepared. Of course, coupled with the fact that we lose a lot of the talent to the global market, which is a very natural sort of phenomenon in a market like, open market like ours. But the large problem has to do with fundamentally the way our institutions and our overall policy in terms of the R&D space is structured. I think that's part of the problem. But I think some of that blame also now, we should be honest in that discussion, and also rests with industry. I think industry is a very significant partner as far as development in these particular sectors, especially AI in, let's say, health and education. A lot of the fundamental research, which are much more public good in nature, that will happen from government institutions. But you see, from there to development and product design, and that really responsibility sits mostly with the industry. And we are seeing that we are lagging in this entire life cycle of building a knowledge economy. So I think we all have to come together. Everyone has a role.
So I want something I noted as you're pointing about the industry, academia, how do I say, collaboration, or one thing I noticed very recently is we as a part of our work, we had the fortune to interview some of the best minds in India in AI and research, right? Like people from ISI, IIT Delhi, IIT Hyderabad, IIT Madras, and one thing that came across is the projects they did, the initiatives they worked on. It has huge potential, and it is in no way behind in a global scale. They are always ahead in terms of global scale, whether it's using chest algorithm, X-ray to read COVID infection, or something like that, or an NLP based work that's happening in India in vernacular languages. But then there's a question, right? These initiatives, these projects, for example, there's another project from IIT, IIIT Hyderabad, where they were able to predict the morbidity rate and risk of a COVID patient days ahead, early days of infection, and that could have been hugely helpful for us. But these things remains as research, right? Once the students goes out, they publish a paper, it remains on paper. They are not coming into a production setting, right? They remain academically, and yes, you can say you have this kind of success rate, or in research setting. But why are our this brilliant work being done by our academics are like remain stuck on papers? What can we do to ensure they're out there to help us and other fellow countrymen of ours?
Now, Jibu, this is a very specific example you have given in a very specific context. Of course, the context is very personal to each of us because we are all in this. But it is a communicable, meaning it's an infectious disease, and it's a large sort of a public problem. And we have seen that when it comes to healthcare, which is more in the nature of infectious diseases, large public good problem, public health problem, there, frankly, industry's role is limited. Of course, they are service providers, they are hospitals, etc. But the core responsibility sits with the government. So even when you have a cool new product which is getting developed by these smart young minds, to make it functional, develop it into a product, and then to really then implement it will require that kind of government capacity, will require for us to see the value. But this is a specific example, like I told you. A lot of excellent research is happening in also, let's say, non-communicable diseases, right? Where there are excellent AI solutions which are getting developed, which, if deployed in the hospital, would lead to reduction in costs for those hospitals, like hospital-acquired infection. This whole antimicrobial resistance, which is becoming a large problem, but it pays for private hospitals to experiment and deploy some of these solutions. And yet, compared to, let's say, the US market or the European markets, of course, their costs in healthcare are much more. So I think, particularly in the US, there is a hunger for these kind of solutions. So there is a willingness to experiment. Of course, the liability, the legal aspect of it is another problem here. But here we have a reluctance. And I think this is where research and eventually the public good, the government, academia, industry nexus, that network has to be fostered by the government. Because that first move, which is a costly, uncertain move, I think industry is not in a position to do, unless, of course, industry associations do it, right? I mean, we have FICCI and the CII and the ASSOCHAMs. Perhaps the health industry collectively, association takes a initiative, but I do see a certain reluctance here vis-a-vis the developed markets.
So another question I want to ask in the same line is, like you pointed out, the COVID is going to reshape the way we lived so far, and it's reshaping the economy, it's reshaping investment. Do you think the has been any significant change in AI adoption or investment as a result of this particular pandemic, especially from a private sector standpoint of view, which has generally seen low investment AI, in India compared to other leaders?
I think in the healthcare space, definitely the appetite within the public sector. Again, these are niche institutions I'm talking about, Jibu. There's no way we can generalize and say that a district hospital in UP or, let's say, Assam is open to deploying an AI solution. We are far from that. But I think there is now an openness and a recognition that knowledge is really our best tool or our biggest weapon in these kind of situations, right? I think that is the larger. But, in no way should we discount the fact that India recognizes that AI solutions are not just ones which industry can deploy to lower cost or become more efficient for greater profitability. AI in India is also seen as providing solutions to core healthcare problems. Access is such a big problem for us, right? I mean, there are a very, very large, almost 50% of villages of UP do not have a sub-center within 5 kilometers of a household on an average. Now imagine what problems of access we are talking about. An average household, if somebody falls sick, you go to Lucknow, Kanpur, or Delhi. Now, when access is the problem, you can imagine like the kind of solution, algorithms. There is a great degree of experimentation that is happening within our public health architecture overall, where doctors in AIMS are training doctors in Lucknow or let's say Tripura, because those guys are limited, in terms of not just the number of people, but also subsequent training. So there are already a lot of experiments, and I think successful. There's a growing appetite. We just don't know about it enough, and I think that is also a problem, because the more you see people taking that initial, first step, second step, and you see success stories, I think it sort of encourages others to follow.
So, I mean, it's very insightful what you pointed out, and I want to add something to it. Speaking about the accessibility, I think we have seen so many AI initiatives, especially tools in diagnostic space. Whether it's diabetic retinopathy or breast cancer, which are much portable and can be carried into local towns. And it can be, I think, Tamil Nadu government, Tamil Nadu e-governance division recently implemented a smartphone app which can detect cataract. So I think that is one aspect of the, how do I say, good part of this technology being entering this space. And I think most of that comes from, like you pointed out, the rising interest from private sector and in a partnership with government. Now, another point which this is something I really wanted to ask you. You have been very vocal about, and I come from Kerala, where every other kid I know is either an engineering graduate or a doctor or a nurse. And I am like the odd one out when I say I studied history or I studied international relations. So they look at you as if something is wrong with you. It doesn't matter, when you say I studied in LSE, it doesn't matter. If I'm not an engineer, I'm worthless in the society. But you have pointed out in your writings that despite this strength of having this abundance of STEM students, right? There's a big issue with quality, right? We have, you have written, we have seen these students when they, the best, even the best when hired by some of the big companies, they had to undergo reskilling programs, right? Training programs and things like that. And we proud ourselves of this STEM, educated generation and the young workforce we have. But how can we get best of the situation when this quality of the people that our universities are producing and the requirement of industry is far apart?
I think that's such a fundamental aspect. It's a structural aspect of our labor market right now. And when I say labor, I mean it's intertwined with education, skilling. That there is a growing divide, Jibu, between the degrees that we are handing out, which means the organized formal training, and the skill set which the market values. And that divide is very costly. It is costly for the students because they're paying for a degree and not really learning skill. It is expensive for the market because when they recruit these thousands of students, they have to be retrained over several months. So 6 to 7 months are usually used by a lot of big IT firms where they sort of retrain them in a lot of things. And it's not just limited to IT anymore. Now it has gone beyond that. So that cost, which is getting privatized, can be lowered or gotten rid of if we actually improve the quality of our education. And I think everybody has been talking about quality of education. In fact, all the way from pre-primary to higher. Then, of course, RT made primary education sort of, a right. And so we got 94% of our children into the classroom. But then what is the quality? And the same logic extends. Of course, attrition happens over time. That even in the higher education space, that a lot of these students coming out with, the necessary degrees are not getting the true market value of it. And therefore, we need these massive reskilling programs, which is a cost. It is an afterthought because fundamentally we are making up for the gaps in the education sector. So I think front and center, we have to recognize that this is a problem that we have to handle in education. And I think the new education policy, which was enacted last year, I think is a big step in the right direction, because it allows states, it allows institutions to develop different kinds of flexible models. But eventually it will be about bringing more and more real skills into the classroom. And I think also encouraging higher education institutions to work with industry, right? To raise funds for research from industry. You know, all of this means fostering these networks where knowledge is imparted. It is like a opposite of what, an apprenticeship type of a program you have in areas like Germany and all. We are trying to bring industry into the classroom so that students begin to get more and more real life skills. So I think that is a very core problem. But I don't know if you're aware, outside Hyderabad, by the way, is the largest supplier of STEM students to the US. The city of Hyderabad. I'm not even talking about Telangana as a state.
Okay, that's interesting.
City of. Now, outside, on the outskirts of Hyderabad, there is a very famous temple, and it is popularly called the Visa Temple. It tells you about the aspirations. That the aspiration of an average engineer who graduates from the region, who is quite well trained, is to go out to the US and realize the potential of. And there is nothing wrong in it. In fact, we encourage it because it transforms families. But I think somewhere it is also a recognition of the fact that there is a big gap at home, that we are not able to retain such talent and provide them with this kind of opportunities back home. Things have also changed. In the last 20 years, the way Bangalore, I think outer, Gurgaon, you look at Hyderabad, Chennai, these are places which have absolutely grown in terms of potential for this sector and growth opportunities, but we are nowhere close to either the quality, the scale of what the global market, particularly the US and now increasingly Australia and Canada, are providing.
I think, since you mentioned this brain drain problem we are facing, especially related to AI, what I have seen is when I look at some of the top companies, whether it's DeepMind or OpenAI, Google, or the universities, right? You often come across these Indian names. So I get curious. I will check their LinkedIn, and you can see at the bottom it will be an Indian engineering school where they started. It could be an IIT or a Manipal or something, right? Like an NIT. That's where the first degree they have procured, and they have been doing some phenomenal work in the global scale, right? In US, Canada, UK, and all the other countries. But what I have also observed with China's recent boom in AI is all the students who go out of China to study in US, they are coming back in hordes, right? They go there, they study there, maybe they spend an year or two there working in industry. Then they bring that experience and that skills that they learn to China, and they build products there, right? Like they build like we have seen, even though they are replicas of Western companies, like Baidu or Tencent or Didi, everything, every company has a founder who somehow is educated in the Western hemisphere. So how can do you think we will be able to replicate this scenario as a solution? How can we fix this?
I think the initial phase, the Chinese return, I think some degree of coercion was there. If you look at 20 years back, for instance, when I was doing my PhD, I had fellow students, or I had subsequently, I had students when I was an instructor who were there and they weren't sure because they had family back home. So if you asked, the Indian students on an average were looking for an extended visa to get some work and eventually get a job in the US. The average Chinese student was always ambivalent. There was always this option of going back, and now it has only grown stronger, right? We are talking averages over time. And I think it's a testimony to the fact that local job opportunities which can realize this kind of value, that if you've received this training When you go back, you're in a position to really build from there. There is also, you see, what is different about research and knowledge creation, that whole industry, is that you also need a threshold, a minimum number of people already there for you to then make that impact. It is very difficult to go and set up institutions. Somebody has to do it. So there is always the first mover sort of a cost or disadvantage. But I think now it is high time that, not in a coercive way, but we seriously think of ways in which we can incentivize. Lots of Indians want to come back too, for some, personal reasons, sometimes even professional reasons. As an emerging market, India is providing a lot of opportunities. You saw a huge movement of people in the 90s, 2000, when the whole boom happened in the IT space here. But I think now we have to build R&D, SEZs. We'll have to design labs. We need to give them the funding. We need to now have a consolidated strategy, time bound, and put the money where the mouth is. Right? So I think if we change the fundamental structure of the way R&D is inbuilt into the economy, we can foster that. It's not rocket science, because we do have the talent. We just want them back, and the ones who are here, we want to keep more of them. Because I think the disenchantment of going abroad, that has now, it's no longer what it was 30 years back.
Of course.
Right? So you know a lot. Now, I think China has its greater Bay Area. China has pockets of excellence. We have to recognize the fact that today, China's, in terms of number of patents, they might still be less than the US, but in terms of industrial design, they're actually way ahead. Right? Their spending in R&D is also, it's significantly more than the US now, which seems to suggest that there is, of course, a recognition that the future, a growth of economies will happen. Now you have moved away from big manufacturing, being the factory of the world, to really becoming the knowledge hub, the services. And that is where they are betting big on AI. And we have to as well. I mean, not as a sort of a copycat, because a lot of our problems that we will be solving through AI are domestic problems. Mm-hmm. There's, of course, a global market, because we can, let's say, offer more cost-effective solutions, etc. But a lot of our problems are domestic. But we will have to work in a consolidated, time-bound, a clear strategy.
Yeah, I know. I know we are running out of time, and I could keep asking questions to you, and I could keep going on. But I know you are a busy person. So, a final question: I want to know what is your expectations on what are the trends that's going to come in AI space in the coming year, especially from which industries will be. I mean, you spoke about healthcare industry. Apart from that, what will be the trends we will see, and what are the things we can look forward to?
I think health, we have to, without digressing from that fact, not just because we are in a pandemic, healthcare has always been a big problem for us. We have problems of quality, quantity, and affordability, right? So access to healthcare, affordable access to healthcare, and quality. Now, on all these counts, I think AI provides us, and we already have several AI solutions, which I think if we begin to deploy. Now, one of the reasons why there is hesitancy is also because the law, the liabilities, you see, it needs an entire infrastructure. So how should the legal, sort of the regulatory framework around adoption of some of these things develop? We need to also sort of build capacity there. But healthcare, I do see as becoming more and more important. And I think not just from the private, but I do believe that this pandemic, if anything, has jolted a lot of local governments also into recognizing that, this helplessness, that there is a certain, first of all, there is a lot of scrutiny. It's a small world today. We are highly interconnected. I think abdication of that core responsibility where basic public health is made available, I think that will increasingly, people will demand it. People are already demanding it. Now, for a while, I've been saying make health political, but in no way had I expected that it will become politicized the way it is today. Yeah. But I think the interstate competition, the inter-region competition, district-wise ranking of performance, and performance on many metrics, not just mortality and so on, but access to beds, hospitals, oxygen. Does every district have, simpler solutions? I think will mean that there is a great push towards adopting these solutions now. So I do see AI in healthcare opening up in a very big way in the public as well as the private space in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much, Professor Shamika Ravi, for your insightful points and for participating in this conversation with us. It was very insightful, and I think our a major sector of our audience are young students and entrepreneurs, and it will be very helpful for them whatever you shared today with us.
My pleasure.